You might think that book banning is a thing of the past, but it is happening right now in communities across the United States. Today, we're going to be pulling back the curtain on this critical issue with a special guest, Rachel of Reads with Rachel. We're going to be talking through what is book banning and what we as parents and readers and lovers of smut can do to really make a difference in the book banning that people are trying to push in our local communities. Listener discretion is advised. This podcast contains mature content intended for adult audiences only. Hello, Rachel. I'm so excited to have you on talking all things book banning. But before we get into the juicy details and not so juicy details of book banning, tell us a bit about your adult reading journey.
Sure. So when I first got into the book community, I felt like I was reading a lot of young adult. Back in booktube days of yore, a lot of people were like mostly just reading young adult, and that sort of transferred over to me when I started watching it. But then I started reading more adult books, and I started making my way into adult romances and dark romance over the last few years. And that's really been a hit or miss situation sometimes, but I'm having a lot of fun with it. Nothing really prepared me for reading adult romances just because it is such a stigmatized and like shat on genre. But then like the book community and its variety and its diversity showed me how many different kinds of things are out there beyond just like the ones that were shat on by the world, like 50 Shades of Grey. Not that I love the series, but most of what you hear about adult romance is like 50 Shades of Grey, ew, and then we never talk about good adult romance books. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about all kinds of stuff, including like adults reading adult books finally, and then also adults deciding that we want to not just police our own reading, but police other people's children's reading.
Which is wild to me.
But can't relate. Cannot relate to that.
Can't relate to that feeling at all. It's interesting because my adult reading journey is a bit reversed in that when I was like 18, 19, I went to, and I've shared this story before, but for you, who you wouldn't know this, I went to a unaccredited Christian college after growing up in a fundamentalist Christian cult. Like legit on like facilities and on acres of land, and we weren't allowed to leave, like legit cult, not like, oh, that church was like kind of culty. And so I snuck my phone in and I found erotica like websites, and I was like, hello, wait a minute. And so mine's like the opposite and then after I had my kids, I was like my libido is shot. What am I doing? I used to read erotica. Let me check out Kindle and see if they have some erotica. Ended up diving into that, and I read 14 erotica books from like October to December, and then was like, whoa, oh my goodness. So mine is like the opposite of yours with the YA going into adult romance. Mine was like erotica into, all right, let's give it some variety now.
You went the opposite route.
Yep. It was a blast, though, and I think that's just shows that everybody's journey is so unique and so fun. But let's go ahead and get into book banning. How did you get involved in this? Like a lot of your content, at least that I see, and maybe it's just because those the stuff that I really like of your content, and that's why the algorithm's feeding it to me. But your content centers around book banning as well as other stuff, right? It's not your whole identity. But when did you kind of get into the book banning?
Yeah, a lot of my content is book banning content. I wasn't planning on doing that, but in 2021, during COVID, there was this author who was talking about being she's like an indie author who nobody knows her anymore, but she was pro changing her school district to remove books that she felt were inappropriate. And I was like shocked by this. And so I started looking into it, and it was Leander County, Texas. And I learned that they were trying to ban many books, but one of them was like Carmen Maria Machado's In the Dream House. And I was so disappointed by this because I'm like, that book is so important for fostering conversation on how to look for red flags for abusive relationships, including in queer relationships. And it can be hard to feel like in a society where it's so queerphobic, you feel like I can't get help because people are so homophobic. They're going to use this as like, oh, see, they're so bad. And I think that is such an important work of nonfiction. And the idea that they would ban it for some out of context scenes was so egregious to me. So I made a video on that. And then 2 years after that, Carmen from Tomes and Textiles, different Carmen, she lives in my county, and she was saying, hey, there's a book that's possibly going to be banned here in Hillsborough. This book is Gay by Juno Dawson. And I said, here? Because I'm like, I just didn't think that it was happening here. And I feel, you almost feel so like stupid when you realize that it's happening in your hometown and you were just oblivious to it, which is what is happening to a lot of people. I went to the school board meeting and I started to make content about this. And then I found out that it's one person in my county who's mostly leading the charge on this. And I said, oh, if one person is going to lead the charge for this, then I'm going to lead the charge against it, because I think that there's a lot of pushback, but these people are so mean and egregious, and there needs to be somebody who says things in a very snappy, kind of rude way. I'm like, well, if there's a opening, then I guess it's going to be me.
Yes. I will be the jerk. I do not care.
I will be the jerk. Like, everybody else is being so nice about it. And I'm like, I appreciate y'all. I do. Your advocacy is great, commendable. You're working hard. You're not being mean enough. It's clearly not working. You need to get meaner. And if you're not going to be meaner, I'm going to be mean for you.
I love that. And I think that's so important. I think back to like, so my kids are homeschooled. My husband homeschools our kids. He enjoys it and gets fulfillment from it. I could never, ever.
I could never.
And like, I check in regularly. Is this still fulfilling for you? He's like, yeah.
I'm really impressed by him and in awe, and it could not be me.
No, exactly. So we knew going into it, especially since I was homeschooled at the cult, I knew going into it that I did not want to homeschool my kids at all, because I was like, I know what it did to me. I know the limitations it put on my ability to be quote unquote normal in college and after college, how it influenced my relationships. So much of it influenced that. And so we have a lot of very open conversations about, let's make sure that our kids can advocate for themselves, that they don't feel like we're just preaching at them, because a lot of the curriculum, especially living in the South, I live in North Carolina, tends to be, if you're homeschooling your kids, that it's for religious reasons, or it's because you want to teach them the right way, and public schools don't teach the right way. There's just so much. Yes, Abeka. Oh my God, that was the program I used. So for people who aren't watching
I'm
the video,
familiar.
Rachel has an Abeka box. Yes, Abeka was the program that I used when
I love that that was not a planned moment. I was just like, I have a box of Abeka by my feet. Let me just yoink. I was going to ask you, so in the cult, did they use their own curriculum, or did they use one of the established ones like BJU, ACE, Abeka?
Yeah, all three.
Yeah.
As each child needed. Those are the really big Christian or fundamentalist Christian-based ones.
And then Saxon for math.
Absolutely. Saxon math. Yep.
Yeah. Yep, Saxon math. Yeah, I also grew up, I call it cult adjacent. Like, you were actually at a cult. I was the cult adjacent people. My father worked for Jimmy Swaggart and Rod Parsley. And yeah, so I was homeschooled for some amount of time, but I also went to Christian school for the majority of my upbringing. And that was my curriculum in that box.
Yes. And so it makes sense, right? Why you and I would feel very strongly about book banning, because thinking back to the cult I grew up in, we had a library of books and they were all pre-approved. And I'm using like quotes here, pre-approved by the leader. And they had to be read through by an adult before we were allowed to read them. And like later on, some would sneak through where there was like a little more than kissing. And we were like, oh my God, pass it around. Like we try to
the scandal.
Yes. The Amish romances with a little too much fondling, right?
Oh God.
Oh my God.
Were you guys allowed or not allowed to read Redeeming Love?
So I borrowed Redeeming Love from the library because we actually were allowed to go to the library sometimes, especially like later as I got older. And I did borrow Redeeming Love and I read it in 2 days, devoured it. And like now looking back, I'm like, that book is so extremely problematic.
It's so problematic and damaging. They were letting little girls, like, have this be read to them. That was in my circle. They were, like, reading this to us and doing Bible study on it with the kids in the room. And this is so problematic.
I mean, it like perpetuates spousal abuse and rape, quite
It
frankly.
does, yeah.
And like for anyone who hasn't read it, don't. You don't need to.
Don't.
But that's what it perpetuates. And so like
It does.
I remember reading it and being like, wow, that was crazy. But then looking back and being like, wow, that was crazy. What in the world?
I remembered it better than it was. Like, I was nicer to it than I should have been. And then I reread it and I'm like, never mind.
Changed my mind. It wasn't good. So yeah, I can understand why this is such an important part, right? Of
Yes.
allowing our kids, other people's kids to read what they want, to be able to get the information that they need, especially because book banning does tend to impact more marginalized communities and their access
Yeah.
to content and their access to books. So what is book banning? People are like, book banning doesn't exist, because I've heard that too. What is it?
Oh, that's so frustrating. Yeah. So the book community has a lot of subsects that when they hear about book banning, even though these are readers, they're saying, I can buy it in the store, so it's not banned. I can get it from the library, so it's not banned. It's in this school, so it's not banned. So ban does not mean federal ban always. A federal ban is one way that a book is banned. According to the Center for Free Speech and Encyclopedia Britannica, book banning is when a government or a person or a group of people remove books from school libraries, public libraries, bookstores, or school reading lists because they object to their content, ideas, or themes. The entire thing about book banning is it's about making access limited. It's about taking away access, and it doesn't start with like a wholesale removal. It starts incrementally. So they're going to start with schools. They're going to start with public libraries. Then they're going to move on to bookstores. They're going to move on to little free libraries. They're going to chip away at it little by little because if they take it all at once, it looks bad. It looks like they're doing cult shit.
Yes.
Which I think that you nailed it in that when people like us who grew up like us see this now and we've removed ourselves from the situation, we see how dangerous this is. And I'm not for making people read stuff they don't want to read. And if you want to be a bigot in your own house, you have the right to do that, even though I think you're a piece of crap for doing that. If people want to do that, whatever. I can't force you to do stuff, and I don't want to force you to do stuff. But we're not going to pretend that you changing public spaces is somehow freedom because you have infringed on other people's freedom to access books incrementally, place by place, because you object to the existence of people reflected in those books. That's book banning.
So it makes me think of there are probably books that should be banned, right? For example, and everyone knows about this, and if you don't, Google it. You can find information on this. The Tilly Cole book where it's a KKK and I haven't read it, so whatever. Romance, where one of them is a KKK member and the other one is part of the BIPOC community. That book probably shouldn't be around, right? Like that is a problematic book. Redeeming Love, problematic book. But
yeah,
that doesn't mean that no one should be allowed to access it. If you want to access it in your own right, then that's your choice. And I'm not going to infringe on that choice. Do I think that you're trash for reading it? Probably. If
yes,
you
I
know
do.
what it's about, right? If you don't know going in, you're like, whoa, never mind, DNF. Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's the difference, right? Because yes, there are books that probably shouldn't exist. Hitler's book probably shouldn't be sold, but it is. And there's not really anything that especially, and I think that the This is such a weird thing to say, having grown up the way I did. But I feel like the Satanic Church has this right in how they approach a lot of the, like, religions in local schools because they're like, "Look, let us do our thing, but if you're gonna
Mhm.
let somebody else do this and you need a chaplain for every faith, then you better believe that I'm going to be there as well."
Yeah.
And so I think that we just have to understand that our decisions and our values do not get to infringe on other people's decisions and their
Right.
values.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that it's very difficult when we talk about extreme problematic works like Mein Kampf.
Right.
It's horrible. And I think that there is a list of books that I could give where I'm like, okay, I don't believe in censorship, but I also don't know that this should exist. But I also am not the arbiter. I think that's very arrogant to believe that any of us could be the singular arbiter, like we have the singular good idea. I think what has to happen with in the cases of books like Mein Kampf, which I obviously wish had never been written in the first place, is that we have to look to places that have it on the shelves, and places like Brazil has laws around the selling of Mein Kampf. And we have to see, does the law that we are setting here justify itself in that it has a good outcome? It does what it sets out to do. It prevents behaviors that are harmful to the rest of society. So I think that's one way to approach that. But I don't have any hard and fast things to say about like actually legislating these things because I want good outcomes and laws have to justify themselves with good outcomes. And I don't want to be just like book banners who are saying, "Well, I think the law should say this," and it doesn't justify the outcome. Like when they say that they want to ban Assassination Classroom because they think that it'll cause school shootings. Like you have to prove that in the first place, and then your legislation would have to justify that outcome. You would actually have to see less school shootings as a causal relationship between those two things. So if the outline of Mein Kampf or the changing the laws around the selling of Mein Kampf does lead to less white supremacy, then sure, let's implement that. But it always has to be an evidence-based measure, in my opinion. But as far like problematic works like Tilly Cole's books, another one that I always talk about where I'm like, I genuinely wish this had never been written is The Pawn and the Puppet by oh, it's terrible. It's horrible. The Pawn and the Puppet by Bernie Shecker is probably the worst book that I have ever read. One of the most, if not the most problematic thing I have ever personally read. And I still wouldn't say that I'm going to advocate for the legislation around banning it anywhere. It shouldn't be in a school, but banning it from bookstores from adults. I'm not going to say that because I don't want to be the arbiter. I don't believe in censorship. I believe in preventative. Like we should have prevented her from writing that by teaching her you can't think these ableist things even in fiction. It's horrible to say these things about DID and OCD. And I'm not for banning books, but I am for social consequences. So the social consequence was that she faced a lot of backlash for that, and I don't think that she'll ever write such terrible DID and OCD rep again. Yeah.
Yeah, and
That's my thoughts on problematic books.
it's interesting too because like our laws in the US are very different than the laws in other countries right now. We're seeing AO3 is going through a lot of censorship in China right now, and a lot of LGBTQIA plus content is getting removed by the government over there. So there's a lot of that. And then we see there was an author who wrote a age gap in Australia. And there were parts in the book where the older man was very clearly grooming the teen. She got arrested for it.
She did, yeah. And that wouldn't have happened in the US, I don't think,
No.
because of the specific legislation that is Australian versus US.
Yeah. So there's so many different dynamics to it. Here we're talking about the US, but there are so many different elements to this conversation. So, all right, we understand what banning is. We understand maybe some of the people that are going against or like trying to get these books banned. What are some examples of the books that they are trying to ban and maybe some of the reasons that they're trying to? So we as parents, as readers, can get a better understanding of what the attack is against?
So I don't have my kids' books, my actual children. Their books are all upstairs, but there is a range of books being banned. So typically when we think of what books are being banned, they think, oh, it's George M. Johnson's All Boys Aren't Blue, Identical by Ellen Hopkins, and then adult books like ACOTAR by Sarah J. Maas, Colleen Hoover's books, which, yeah, those are being challenged and banned. And I could have a conversation with book banners about whether or not I think that ACOTAR should be in a high school. We could have a conversation on that. And again, I'm not the arbiter. I'm not going to decide for other parents. I could tell you what makes me uncomfortable, but my discomfort shouldn't be law. I have to stress, just because we are uncomfortable does not mean that we should start making laws around our discomfort, because that's exactly what happens when you live in a cult or a cult-adjacent situation, right? Again, like, laws have to justify themselves with the outcomes of the people that we're legislating on. So what we end up seeing is that they stick to talking about the books with the sexual content that will make you the most uncomfortable to talk about. All Boys Aren't Blue, which is a nonfiction. There's Colleen Hoover's book, So Ugly Love, ACOTAR. But then you look at the other books that they're banning, and it's nonfiction books about poetry, like Milk and Honey by Ruby Carr, which she talks about her assault in Milk and Honey, and I believe also in The Sun and Her Flowers, which is another book by Ruby Carr that gets banned. And she has these like squiggly line arts, and some of them are women's bodies. And so they say this squiggly line art is pornography. That's not true. You can't just say that every naked body is pornography. Right. Otherwise, the naked statues outside of, is it the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., is that porn now? So we have to have kind of a nuanced conversation on what pornography is. But the nuanced conversation is dead here. So if they don't want to talk about what porn is, then, or if they want to talk about what porn is, fine, we could have that conversation. But first and foremost, I want them to justify why they are trying to ban children's picture books that have no porn in them.
Right.
Like, we can talk about the naked squiggly lines in Milk and Honey by Ruby Carr. We can talk about the sex scene in Ugly Love by Colleen Hoover. We can talk about the sex scene in ACOTAR. But first, I want you to explain to me why you are trying to ban a children's book called Ban This Book by Alan Gratz.
Yeah.
And so you can look at some of their challenge forms is the thing. So a challenge is the formal form that you fill out when you're trying to get a book banned. And you have to state your reasoning for why you're trying to get the book banned. And so when you look at the challenge forms for Ban This Book by Alan Gratz, which is a middle grade children's book, it's good for kids like 7 to 12 would probably like this. So my kid really likes this book. The reason why they want to ban this book is because the little girl is breaking rules around reading books that her library banned. And it's talking about the specific challenge form from Bruce Friedman in Clay County, Florida, who is their resident county book banner. He said that he wants it banned in part because it's Antifa and also because it's talking about books that have been banned. Because it talks about books that have been banned, this book also has to be banned. It's like, all right, I can't even talk to you about the squiggly line naked woman in Ruby Carr yet, because we have to talk about why you think it's appropriate to challenge a children's book because it talks about another book that you don't like. And then when we talk about, there's another book banner in Escambia County and Santa Rosa County, Florida. She bans books in 2 different counties. Her name is Vicki Baggett here in Florida. She's a teacher. She has been caught using slurs in the classroom, and she is allowed to keep teaching, and yet she thinks it's appropriate to behave like that in front of children, but tries to ban Katie the Cat Sitter Volume 2 because the mom in this says, it's okay if you don't want to have a boyfriend or girlfriend or non-binary friend right now. Like, I have to understand why you guys, like, you can't just label everything porn until we point this out to you and you're like, I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to have to justify myself. I'm just going to call it all porn.
Right.
And then there's like the entire list of children's picture books that they try to get banned. Harriet Gets Carried Away. They want it banned because Harriet has 2 dads. Tango Makes 3. They want it banned because Tango the penguin has 2 dads. And it's a real life story. So what they're really showing us is that these books, Huda Fahmy's book, her graphic novel, Felix Ever After, by Case and Calendar, what they're showing us is that they just want certain people to not exist. And when you actually look at their challenge forms and when you say, all right, we'll talk about the porn, but first you need to justify all of these other books that contain no sexual content and tell me why you think it's appropriate for you to try to dictate an entire library system, an entire state's library system, all because you don't like depictions of people having two dads.
When that's
Sorry, that went on really long.
no,
I'm so sorry.
I appreciate it. And that's the problem, right? Is that they want society to reflect what their values and bunny
Right.
ears here because that's not values if it is demeaning someone else or claiming that someone else does not exist because it goes against what you believe, right? That doesn't make it true just because you believe it or I don't. These people exist, period. And they deserve respect, period. We've talked about some of the things that they're trying to ban. There's even a book that we got from our little free library. I think it's called like Ban This Book or something like that. And it's all about banned books. And so even though my kids don't really know anything about banned books at this point, I was like, here, we're gonna introduce this book because y'all need to know what's going on in the world. And I think that's another thing, like you mentioned, the person who's this book talks about other books that are banned. It's like, oh, so you don't want people to know history. That's a problem. That's what the Nazis did. They were destroying history.
Yes. They really don't like when you compare them to the Nazis. They typically say, if I'm not burning books, then I'm not a Nazi. I'm like, I don't think you understand what the Nazis were actually trying to achieve in burning books. It was that they were trying to systematically erase people. They did not just try to erase Jewish people. They tried to erase Jewish people and Romani people and communists and queer people. They tried to erase systematically so many people groups that did not fit their worldview. And part of doing this was banning books. And part of it was all of the other terrible acts against humanity that they did. And if we are starting to see patterns of you are trying to erase people's existence and pretend that they don't exist, then yeah, I think you're acting a little bit like a Nazi. And I think that maybe that's a bad look,
Right.
and you might want to reflect.
Yeah. So how does it impact us, right? Okay, maybe for me, my kids are homeschooled, right? So they get to read whatever, almost whatever they want. I tend to be, if it gets to like farts and poop and all that stuff, I tend to be like, all right, dial it back. No more Big Nate for about a month, right?
I am also so sick of potty humor. I don't know about you, but I am so tired of it.
Yes.
I'm like, I can't. I'm like, enough. If I hear one more fart joke, that kids book, Everybody Poops,
Yeah.
the one with all the animals, I'm not for banning from other people's houses, but from my house, banned, gone. We're done. It's over. I can't take any more poop jokes.
Yes.
Yeah, so my kid's reading Super Boba Cafe right now, and also The AI Incident by J.E. Thomas. And we're having a really good time with that. But again, they just keep going back to wanting to read books about farts and poop.
Yep. Yeah, we try to make our family reads a little better. But my oldest, my 11-year-old, he got a Kindle for Christmas. And so he's got access to all of the Amazon Kids Plus books. And I'm like, okay, we're going to dial it back. And I can see what you read, so I'll know. It's like trying to do that and being like, okay, here's another book. If you read it, like, here's 5 books. You can pick what of those 5 ones you want to read, and you'll get $5 if you read it by the end of the month. Cool. Like, the incentivization to read something else, I think, is helpful.
The summer reading program is always great for that because they'll recommend new books. And I'm like, finally, a librarian recommending something, and it's not a poop book. It's not just poop jokes and underpants jokes.
Yes. So us who are maybe homeschooling our kids or are really like interested in what our kids are reading and our kids have access to all of these books where we're not maybe personally banning them. But what are some ways that these book bans can impact us not just as parents, but as smut readers as well. I know there's a lot in Project 2025 that is and could potentially impact it. And then there was that library, I cannot, somewhere in the Midwest that happened in the last year or so where you could not go to the adult section without an ID, which is like, what? What do you mean? That's wild.
Yeah, some lady was like, I couldn't walk my kid into the section because I had my baby with me, and my baby didn't have a library card, so they wouldn't let her into the other section. It's like the rules have gotten, and most of the time, librarians are not doing these things because they want to restrict access. Most of the time, it's because legislation is written poorly. I will say that in the case of what's happening with Pasco County, Florida right now, their library system is part of trying to censor books, in my opinion. They are trying to make certain books go away. And they have to, again, like it looks bad if you say you want to ban books, which is why they're constantly saying, we're not banning books. We're just trying to get age appropriate material. But even that's starting to make them look like censorship advocates.
Right.
So they have to change the language again. And so what they're now doing is they're saying, we're not banning books and we're not censoring books. We're just trying to put certain books in certain sections. So what Pasco County, Florida has done is when their Board of County Commissioners said they wanted to get rid of books, the lawyer on the Board of County Commissioners said, you can't just remove books. They're going to get sued, right?
Yeah.
And so what they did was they got sneaky and they got their library system to make it so that certain books, and you can guess which ones deemed political, according to library workers, are moved to the parenting section. So you have children's picture books now in a section for adults. So what happened was several of the people in the county were like, well, we're going to appeal because these are children's picture books. They need to be in the children's section because if they're not in the children's section, they're not getting picked up by curious kids, which means they're going to get weeded. They're going to get taken off shelves and thrown in the trash because nobody's using them. Nobody's checking them out. And so it's a sneaky way to make sure that there are no checkouts. It's a sneaky way to get rid of the book in a slow process that will work, and they know it will work. Nobody's going to go to an adult section to look for children's picture books. That doesn't happen. That's not what parents do. And that's not what the parents of Pasco County asked for. And yet, the library is defending this decision. So Pasco County residents are like, you're saying that this book, Bobby and the Big Valentine, which is a book with some queer rep, is parenting because it's too big of a concept for children to understand on their own. And yet you have a children's picture book in the children's section about Rosie the Riveter. Can children understand engineering? I don't think that they can. So what they're trying to do is find sneaky tactics to make sure that they can get rid of these books quietly. And that's one of the ways that they're doing. So there will be less books on your kids' public library shelves, and you won't even know it because they found very sneaky tactics to get rid of the people that they don't want to exist being depicted in publicly available media. The other way is it doesn't encourage publishers to pick up queer books. Even Barnes & Noble is now carrying less middle grade than they ever have.
Yeah.
And what ends up happening is that if they don't sell, then publishers aren't likely to buy in the first place. So if queer books aren't selling, queer books aren't going to libraries, queer books aren't being checked out, then you have this slow process where you have chipped away at the even possibility of these books getting published. So we are going to see less queer books just in existence simply because they have made it so that nobody checks them out, nobody buys them, nobody can find them. And then they, claim that everybody who writes a queer book is a groomer. And so now these people have been ostracized from society. So you don't have to imprison these people for writing queer books. You don't have to burn the books. You can play a long game that chips away at access, that makes them disappear. And you have plausible deniability. You look like your hands are clean. That's the game that they're playing now. That's what Project 2025 laid out. So that does affect bookstores because bookstores aren't going to buy things if they don't think they're going to sell them.
Right.
Libraries aren't going to buy things if they can't get checkouts. And publishers aren't going to buy contracts for those books in the first place. That's what Project 2025 wanted.
So it's not about banning one specific book. It's about controlling it, the narrative, and shaping it in the way that they want it to look. to control how future generations potentially view these topics that they feel should be viewed a certain way, which as a parent is like, no, keep your hands off my kid's brain. Thank you very much.
It is. It's exactly about that. It's about, and they will ignore all of the parents like us who feel like we've got it. We can have hard conversations with our kids about things that make us uncomfortable. I can do that. I don't need help with that. And the idea that it was ever about helping me parent my kids was always a lie. It was always really about creating a society in which certain people do not exist, making it so uncomfortable for them to exist that they are quiet until they disappear. That is what the hope is. And they're doing it in many different facets, but media is one of them. That's really all this is. That's what all the book banning push is.
Ugh. Okay, so now that we're all depressed, what can we do
You're so welcome.
to fight back on this? What are some things that we as parents, as readers, as library participants, what are some things we can do to get more aware of what's happening in our community and our local stuff, but also push it against this?
So, first and foremost, get to your meetings if you can for your public library board and your public school board. And if you can't, then email and let them know that you support access, that you support the freedom to read, and you don't support any attempts, be they overt or covert, at censorship. You can also volunteer with your library if possible. But again, some people have had their library access, absolutely decimated recently by the defunding of the IMLS. So people are losing hoopla access. Library branches are closing down. They're getting rid of staff. It's a real bad time for public libraries. So getting out to your meetings is so, so important. My kid, we're blessed to, first of all, have a car and have a library that is within 15 minutes driving for us. Some families don't have that.
Right.
And with the defunding of the IMLS, it's going to get worse. And poor people are going to suffer the most. Marginalized communities are going to suffer the most. And so, when people just say, well, if it's banned, just buy the book. And I'm like, what?
Yeah, not everyone can afford to.
Not everybody, public access evens the playing field. We should never just be just buy the book. You have to assume that public access, that everybody is entitled to public access. That, you have to assume that nobody has the means. And that's what the public access is even there for. I don't have the money to buy playground equipment, but I have the ability to get to a park down the street. That levels the playing field so that my kids can play outside like everybody else's kids. And that's what public libraries are for. They create public access. But I wonder if people said that back in the days of segregating swimming pools. Did they tell people oh, just buy your own swimming pool? What do you mean? Are you insane?
Yeah.
With what money? Yeah, and it completely leaves out marginalized folks out of the conversation. It completely leaves out barriers to access. When you explain this to people, you're you're just making excuses. There is no excuse for not supporting public access to books. What you can do is you can support more public access by utilizing it. The more checkouts, the more the library can justify keeping its lights on, keeping the purchase. They have to justify their budget. If you're checking things out, they have justification. Go in there and sign up for a class if you can. My kid took a coding class. They explained to him how to use Scratch, which is an online free resource for teaching kids coding, but he didn't understand how to use it. The library had a class. You can check out GoPros from some libraries. There is so much that your library offers, and you should absolutely utilize it if possible so that they can justify their budgets. And then your public school board, I would find progressive parents in your area and teachers in your area and librarians in your area and ask them, I'm not saying progressive teachers and librarians, ask any teacher, what do you need from civilians that we can go ask? Because every teacher needs things from the local school board, from the local district. So go ask how you can advocate. And the freedom to read just always falls within these things. Everything is not disconnected from other things. Public education, access to public education, the same people who show up advocating to ban books from schools are the same people advocating to pay teachers less and have less money for special needs students. These things are always connected. So once you start showing up for students, teachers, marginalized families who are affected when school districts do really shitty stuff, all of it's connected. You're advocating for the freedom to read just by proxy. So getting in your local community, national organizations are a really important part of this. So there is Defense of Democracy, Freedom to Read. There is also subchapters like Florida Freedom to Read, Texas Freedom to Read. There is National Parents Union. There are so many grassroots organizations that you can join up with and be a part of. And even if you don't think that book banning is happening in your area, probably one person in your area wants to censor people. And so if you are like the one person holding it back, good. Don't stay silent until it's too late. Get involved and even like preemptively telling your library, hey, I support you guys and I thank you for all that you do for the freedom to read. That's important. That matters, even if it's just an email. Email your library director, email your board of county commissioners and tell them that you support the freedom to read and that you support your tax dollars going to your libraries and that you don't support censorship advocacy in your local area. And get to your local bookstores and buy queer books. If you actually have the money, which a lot of people right now don't, if you do, sure, get to your local indie bookstore and buy queer books so that you can tell publishers that you don't want them to go quietly, right? You don't want them to go away. You want the queer, smutty books to exist, and they should exist. And if there's people in your local community, I always say this, if there's people in your local community who are trying to ban books, find out who they are and make fun of them on the internet. That is my go-to tactic. I think it works, in my opinion. And if it's not working, I will say that it does feel good. It feels good to be as shitty to book banners as they are being to the local librarians.
Yeah.
They are so awful to them. It being dished back is fully deserved. I think that's it.
Yes, I love it. I think that it's so important too, right? That I'm thinking of things that even as someone who maybe can't be involved in the public school system as much since my kids don't really go, and it feels weird to like butt into that. Maybe when they're in high school, I'll go to all the meetings and stuff. But I love my local library and thinking even about how there's a state park near me. There's two that are both within about a 30-minute drive that we like to go hiking at. And both of them have a free little library. And so what are those books that we've read that have these really great concepts or are written by BIPOC authors or by queer authors where maybe someone might not have access to it, but they're scouring these free libraries for this access. And then being able to drop those books in there for them, I think can make an impact on someone. I know we're always like checking them out, even though we have tons of books. We don't need more. But my kids are always like, what's in there? Let's go look. Let's grab one book. And I'm like, cool. But next time we're bringing 5 books and we're going to give them 5 books and we'll take one because we have plenty. I explained to my kid that my oldest, that the average American has 13 books in their house. And he looks at our bookshelf. If you're looking at the screen, you can see my bookshelf. I have about 300 books personally that are adult smutty romances. They have a lot out in the living room where we have around our entire TV 2 big bookcases, very similar to the ones behind me. And then we've got those block ones underneath the TV. And it is covered with my husband's YA books because he likes to read YA, and then my kids' books. And it's like everything from the Imaginarium books that we got when they were babies all the way up through like big chapter books. So we just got a big box of 40 books from the Book Bundler. They ship out of Virginia and it's all used books and there's like less than $1 each. And I was like, I need to get these now.
That's a steal.
Right? So he's looking at that and he's like, 13? Are you lying? And I'm like,
yeah, I don't have a lot of books in my house. Don't look.
don't know what you're talking about.
I can't relate to that. We have so few books in here.
But that's why I think it's so important that we do give in ways that we possibly can, whether it's donating to our library, advocating for the library, or these free little libraries in our communities, being able to give the things and resources that we have to these places so people less fortunate than us can have access to these books. I think it's so important.
I love Little Free Library. I am trying to start an Instagram account for the ones in my area just to show people like what's around because we are really spoiled. We have so many here and we have found such like incredible books of going. It can be such like a joy to bring your kids to those.
Yeah.
And like you're riding down the street, like, where is it? And you're like, oh, you found it. I love little free library hunting. And that's another thing that comes under attack. We had that happen here in Hillsborough where somebody put one up on public parks property and it had a rainbow on it. And somebody called and complained about it until the county parks department was forced to put out something that said that you can't put any up on any public parks department unless it is at a public park that has staffing there at all times because of a safety issue.
Right.
It's like, that's, again, you have to justify that. There is no safety issue with little free libraries across the United States.
Right.
You're literally just capitulating to bigots and writing it into legislation with no justification. But little free libraries, that's another thing is when they say it's just about school books, it's not.
Right.
When they say it's just about public library books, it's not. Because they come for little free libraries because little free libraries are one of the greatest points of access that we have because they're entirely community run, entirely free. You don't need an address to use them. You don't need anything. You just need to show up. And that's so huge for creating access points to people who literally have nothing. So they are also under attack and they also need to be utilized. So I can't encourage people enough to get out to their little free libraries.
I want to do one so bad on my front lawn.
Oh my God, me too.
I keep telling my husband, I'm like, this year, maybe we can this year. I really want to. I would love to do it, especially now that I found the book bundler because like a mix of, like I said, small and big chapter books for less than $1 each. And then we got my younger one, he's working on reading, and we got him all of it was like a variety of the I Can Read Scholastic 1 through 4, whatever they are, all for less than $1 each. And it was like a bundle of 20 of those books. And he was so excited.
The Scholastic Book Fair is another place where it is under attack, where the right to read is under attack because librarians were told they had to opt into a diverse collection if they wanted books with Black girls on the cover, if they wanted books with 2 moms in a kid's picture book. And they wanted to replace Scholastic Book Fairs with Brave Books, which is a fundamentalist Christian publisher. So it's another example of a place where they are trying to create less access to examples of people who they simply don't want to exist. Like even when it's not about public dollars, even when it's literally the parents paying, they still want to control what you have access to. So if you don't believe that it'll affect books, just look at what they're trying to do with the Scholastic Book Fair. And they will come for smut books after this. That is the last of this. That is the last step of this. But they will do it. And that really goes back to like the beginning of censorship in this country in particular was about censoring people that they didn't want to exist in a way that was so overt and horrible with what happened with Anthony Comstock. And I encourage anybody listening to look him up because it really was about censoring women. It was really about censoring women. And some of the first books banned in United States history were queer books. The history of this is just repeating itself, but it rhymes. It's going to eventually go to smut books too. So when people say on Book Talk, relax, they're not banning books, you're still going to read your smut books. It's like they're coming for you last, but they're still coming for you. If you think that you have any value to these people, you and your books, you don't. You do not have any value to these people. They will come for you, even if they come for you last. It'll be you, and you'll have nobody with you because everybody else will be gone.
Yes. And we see the same thing with the censorship that sexual education and women's pleasure gets on social media even now, right? What do you mean they're not
Absolutely.
come for the books that focus on female pleasure? Really? Come on.
I don't know how they forgot how much these people hate women, but they're going to have a terrible reminder if these people get their way.
Yeah. Okay, there's things we can do. Yes, we're a little depressed, but we feel empowered because there are things that we can take action on. If people are like, okay, I've got my marching orders, but I want to support Rachel, find out what you're doing in the world, where can people find you, get to know you, hang out with you?
So I have a YouTube channel called Reads with Rachel, where I do most of my job and my work. But I have started a bindery page. And if you join, like it's free to join, you can join. I do have a banned book club named after my resident county book banner, Julie. It's called Julie Hates This Book Club.
I love
And
it.
if you would like to join and read, if you would like to join and read banned books with us, we are reading Flamer in the month of July. And you can join anytime just by going to my bindery page, and it'll like immediately allow you to join my Discord, and then you can get to talking shit about book banners with us.
That was awesome. I love the pettiness level of that. That's just epic. Like you said, they're going to be jerks. We can be jerks right back. No, we don't have to like demean people. But if you're being a jerk, I don't have to be nice to you. And I think that's something I've been teaching my kids lately is like, you can be kind, but you don't have to be nice.
Yeah, I think I probably could be described as demeaning to book banners in particular, but only book banners in particular. There are a lot of people that I don't showcase ire for on the internet. Book banners singularly get that from me, because if you're trying to erase the existence of people, you deserve to be called an asshole on the internet.
I agree.
I reserve the right.
I love that. Thank you so much, Rachel. This was so much fun.
Thank you so much for having me.